The first thing Alistair Romano saw was not the cold steel of the handcuffs or the sea of flashing blue and red lights painting his terrified face. It was the locket. A simple, silver heart, tarnished with age, swinging gently from a chain held between a woman's slender fingers. It was open, and from the sterile glare of the federal floodlights, he could just make out the faded photograph inside. A smiling young woman holding a baby boy. His mother. And him. The woman's eyes, chips of ice in the chaotic night, met his. "Remember this, Alistair?" she asked, her voice a low, steady hum beneath the symphony of sirens. He fell to his knees on the cold marble of his own ballroom, the empire he had built with blood and fear crumbling around him. He remembered. God, how he remembered. 6 months earlier, that locket was tucked safely beneath the cheap, starchy collar of a waitress uniform. Anya moved through the greasy air of the Corner Slice, a diner that smelled of stale coffee and regret. Her movements were economical, precise, a stark contrast to the weary slump of the other staff. She was invisible, and that was her armor. The bell above the door chimed, a dissonant clang that announced the arrival of a storm. Don Alistair, the bull. Romano entered, flanked by 2 mountains of muscle in ill-fitting suits. The diner fell silent. People stared into their coffee cups, suddenly fascinated by the swirls of cream. Alistair didn't walk. He consumed space, his arrogant swagger a physical assault on the quiet misery of the room. He sat at the cleanest table, which still wasn't clean enough. He ran a disdainful finger over the formica, then wiped it on a napkin. Anya approached, her notepad in hand, her expression a perfect mask of polite neutrality. "Coffee." "Black," he grunted, not bothering to look at her. She returned moments later, the pot steaming. As she poured, one of his thugs, Lorenzo, nudged his boss, pointing to a rival mobster eating quietly in a corner booth. Alistair's head snapped up. In his distraction, his arm jerked, knocking against hers. Hot coffee sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the back of his hand. It was a drop, a single, insignificant drop. Alistair hissed, snatching his hand back as if bitten by a snake. His eyes, small and black like a shark's, finally focused on Anya. It wasn't anger in them. It was something worse, the bored cruelty of a king about to step on an ant. "You clumsy little—" He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he picked up his own full cup of coffee. It was scalding hot. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed its contents directly onto her hand. Anya didn't scream. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped her lips, but she held her ground, her face pale. The burning liquid clung to her skin, an agony that felt white-hot and electric. The entire diner watched, frozen in a mixture of terror and pity. Alistair laughed, a low, guttural sound. "That's for your incompetence." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single quarter, and threw it on the floor. It skittered under the table. "And that's your tip. Pick it up." Her hand was on fire. Blisters were already beginning to form. But her eyes never left his. They were clear, analytical, and utterly devoid of fear. It was a look he was too arrogant to recognize as dangerous. "I said," he growled, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Pick it up." Slowly, deliberately, she knelt. Her movements were stiff with pain and fury. As her fingers closed around the coin, Alistair placed his gleaming $1,000 leather shoe directly on top of her hand, grinding the quarter into the grimy linoleum. He put his full weight on it. A bone in her hand crunched. This time, a tear escaped her eye, tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. But it wasn't a tear of pain. It was a tear of pure, distilled rage. He finally removed his foot and sauntered out of the diner, his men trailing behind him like vultures. The moment the door closed, the diner's owner, a kind, elderly man named Sal, rushed over. "Anya! My God, your hand!" She looked at her hand, at the raw, red burn and the deep, cruel indentation of the coin. Then she looked at Sal, her eyes hardening into something ancient and cold. "He made a mistake, Sal," she whispered, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but with a terrible gathering strength. "He thinks I'm just a waitress." That night, in a cramped apartment that smelled of antiseptic and boiled cabbage, Anya wasn't a waitress. The room was a stark contrast to her public persona. One wall was covered in monitors, lines of code scrolling silently across them. A disassembled laptop lay on a workbench, its parts meticulously organized. This was her real office. For 5 years, she had been a ghost, an elite intelligence analyst for a shadowy government agency, specializing in dismantling criminal empires from the inside out. They called her Echo, because by the time you knew she was there, your world was already collapsing. She had left that life to care for her dying mother, trading encrypted servers for greasy spoons, needing to stay off every grid to protect them both from a past that was far more dangerous than any Mafia don. But Alistair Romano had just put himself on her grid. She sat at her terminal, her burned and broken hand wrapped in gauze. With her good hand, she typed, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that was hypnotic. She wasn't just hacking Alistair Romano. She was dissecting him. Financial records, shell corporations, encrypted communications. Firewalls melted away like snow, passwords cracked in seconds. To her, his digital empire was a house made of glass. A small, almost imperceptible detail in the diner came back to her. While Alistair was brutalizing her, he had taken a sugar packet from the dispenser. He'd fiddled with it, torn a small corner, then set it back down, unused. But Anya's training was in observation. She had seen the minute flicker of his thumb, the way he'd pressed it to the underside of the table. She pulled up the diner's security camera feed, which she had looped and copied within minutes of returning home. Zooming in, she analyzed the reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. There it was. Not a sugar packet. A listening device. A tiny state-of-the-art bug. Alistair was spying on the rival in the corner booth. Amateur, she thought, but useful. With a few keystrokes, she piggybacked onto the bug's signal, rerouting its audio feed directly to her own encrypted server. She was now a silent passenger in Alistair Romano's most private conversations. "He thinks I'm a clumsy girl," she murmured to the empty room, her face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. "Let's see how he feels when he's been tripped by a ghost." The line was crossed a week later. Anya had been using her newfound access to map Alistair's network, identifying his lieutenants, his money launderers, his paid-off cops. It was a slow, methodical process of strangulation. She was content to play the long game. Then she came home from a double shift, her body aching, to find the door to her apartment kicked in. The lock was shattered, the wood splintered. Inside, it was chaos. Her mother's medicine was scattered across the floor. The thin mattress was slashed open. Her meager possessions were destroyed. But they hadn't touched her computer equipment. It was too well hidden behind a false wall. They weren't looking for a ghost. They were looking for a waitress who had shown a flicker of defiance. This was a message, a crude, brutal message to stay down. Then she saw it. On the floor, amidst the wreckage, was the framed photograph she kept on her bedside table. It was the only picture she had of her mother in her youth, holding a swaddled baby. Anya's older brother, taken from them by sickness when he was just an infant. It was her mother's most sacred treasure. The glass was shattered. A muddy boot print was stamped across her mother's smiling face. The frame was snapped in two. Something inside Anya broke. The cold, analytical professional vanished, replaced by a fury so pure it was silent. She picked up the two halves of the photograph, her hands shaking. This wasn't business anymore. This wasn't a mission. This was a blood debt. She walked to her terminal, the broken photo held tight in her hand. The audio from Alistair's bug was streaming in. She could hear him laughing with Lorenzo. "And you should have seen her face when she finds her little hovel," Alistair cackled. "A little message from Uncle Alistair. Nobody looks at me that way." "What about the hand, boss?" Lorenzo asked. "A broken little bird with a broken wing. She won't be flying anywhere. She'll learn." Anya's eyes narrowed. A plan, cold and perfect, began to form in her mind. He wanted to break a little bird? She was going to show him what it felt like to be torn apart by an eagle. "You don't burn a ghost's past, Alistair," she whispered to the screen. "You only create a monster." Alistair Romano loved two things: money and the fear he inspired. His weekly high-stakes poker game was where he indulged both. It was held in the back room of an opulent steakhouse he owned, a place filled with cigar smoke, expensive whiskey, and the nervous sweat of men who owed him everything. No one ever won against Alistair. It was an unspoken rule. You played, you lost a respectable amount, you kissed his ring, and you were allowed to continue breathing. That Tuesday, a new player sat at the table. A woman. Her face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and dark sunglasses, but her presence was electric. She was dressed in a simple but elegant black dress that spoke of quiet money. She introduced herself only as Echo. Alistair was intrigued. A new lamb for the slaughter. Lorenzo, standing behind him, shifted uncomfortably. There was something familiar about her posture, her stillness. "Buy-in is 100 grand, sweetheart," Alistair sneered. "You got the cash for a big boys game?" The woman didn't answer. She simply opened a sleek briefcase and began stacking bricks of crisp $100 bills, $1 million. The table went silent. Anya or Echo had liquidated every hidden asset she had. She'd sold off untraceable crypto, cashed in favors from her old life. This was everything she had in the world. An all-or-nothing gambit. For the first hour, she played conservatively, folding most hands, watching. But she wasn't just watching the cards. Through a microscopic earpiece, she was listening to Alistair. The bug he'd planted in the diner was still active on his person, a cheap piece of tech he'd forgotten about. She could hear his breathing, the slight tremor when he was bluffing, the almost inaudible sigh of relief when he had a strong hand. She could hear Lorenzo whispering advice. She was playing poker with a man whose soul she could hear. Then she began to play. She called his bluffs with unnerving accuracy. She folded just before he revealed a monster hand. She bled him, chip by chip, her pile of money growing into a mountain. The other players, smelling blood in the water, grew bolder. The atmosphere in the room shifted from fear to a predatory excitement. Alistair's face, usually a mask of smug control, was turning a blotchy red. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He was losing, in his own room, in front of his own men. The final hand came near dawn. It was just the two of them left. The pot was enormous, over $2 million. Alistair went all in. "Read 'em and weep, sweetheart," he snarled, slamming his cards down. A full house, aces over kings, an almost unbeatable hand. A smug, triumphant grin spread across his face. Echo slowly, deliberately, laid her cards down one by one. 4 of a kind. 4 queens. The room erupted. Alistair stared at the cards as if they were snakes. He looked from the queens to her face, his mind refusing to process the humiliation. He had been cleaned out, gutted in public. She stood up, her movements fluid. She began packing the cash back into her briefcase. "Who the hell are you?" Alistair choked out, his voice a strangled rasp. She paused and lifted her sunglasses, just enough for him to see her eyes. The same clear, cold eyes from the diner. Recognition dawned on his face, followed by disbelief, then a volcanic, sputtering rage. "Just a clumsy girl with a bit of luck," Anya said, her voice soft but carrying across the stunned silence. She picked up a single $100 bill from the table, walked over to him, and tucked it into the pocket of his $1,000 suit. "And that's your tip." She walked out, leaving Alistair Romano impotent and fuming in the ruins of his own invincibility. The dopamine hit was sweet, but Anya knew it was just an appetizer. Humiliating him wasn't enough. She needed to destroy him, and for that, she needed more than just his money. She needed his secrets, the real ones, the ones buried in blood and bone. The key was Lorenzo. Anya had listened to hundreds of hours of Alistair's conversations. She knew he treated his right-hand man like dirt, constantly demeaning him, shorting his pay, and reminding him that he was nothing without the Romano family. Lorenzo's loyalty was a chain of fear, and Anya knew exactly which link to break. She arranged a meeting in a deserted parking garage, the kind of place where deals were made and bodies were left. Lorenzo arrived, jumpy and suspicious, a hand resting on the gun under his jacket. Anya stepped out of the shadows. She wasn't Echo, the glamorous gambler. She was the waitress again, her hand still lightly bandaged. She wanted him to see the woman he had watched his boss brutalize. "What do you want?" he snapped, his eyes darting around nervously. "I want to offer you a better life, Lorenzo," she said calmly. "One where you're not Alistair's punching bag." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think you can buy me? The Don would skin me alive." "He's going to fall, Lorenzo, hard, and you can either fall with him, or you can be the man who gets a deal and walks away with a new name and a fat bank account." Empty words. "Is this empty?" Anya held up her phone and played a recording. It was from the bug just last night. Alistair, drunk after the poker game, was raging to another capo. And Lorenzo, that useless slug, he just stood there. I should have had him whacked years ago. He's got the spine of a jellyfish. The color drained from Lorenzo's face. Hearing the words in his boss's own voice, the casual, dismissive venom shattered his terrified loyalty. "What do you need?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Alistair keeps a second ledger," Anya stated, not asked. "The real one, not the sanitized version for his accountants. It details every bribe, every hit, every shipment. Where is it?" Lorenzo hesitated for a long moment, the war for his soul playing out across his face. Finally he broke. "The old cannery by the docks, sub-level storage, behind a false wall in the freezer unit. Coded, of course. He calls it his legacy." "Thank you, Lorenzo," Anya said. She transferred a large sum of crypto to a numbered account for him. "Get out of the city. Don't look back." That night, Anya became a physical ghost. Dressed in black, she moved through the derelict cannery like a shadow. The place was a maze of rusting machinery and the faint, foul smell of decay. She found the freezer unit, the air thick with a biting cold. Behind a stack of rotting crates, she located the false wall, just as Lorenzo had described. It was locked with a complex digital keypad. But Anya wasn't a safecracker. She was a surgeon. She bypassed the electronics, her tools moving with practiced ease. The heavy insulated door swung open, revealing a small, climate-controlled vault. And inside, on a simple metal shelf, was a thick, leather-bound book. his legacy. She opened it. Page after page of handwritten entries. Names, dates, amounts, coded notations for murders, for trafficking, for political corruption that reached the highest levels of the city. It was the Rosetta Stone of Alistair Romano's entire criminal enterprise. But as she flipped through the brittle pages, her breath caught. Near the back, in a section dated 25 years ago, was an entry that wasn't about business. It was personal. Entry 117, final payment to Dr. Abramov. Loose end tied. A. Petrova and the girl, Anastasia, relocated. Off the books. Gone for good. My father's mistake is buried. Anya's blood ran cold. Petrova, her mother's name. Anastasia, the name her mother would whisper in her sleep, a name Anya had always assumed belonged to a dream. Her world tilted on its axis. This wasn't just about revenge for a slap, for a trashed apartment. This was about her entire life. Her father wasn't a deadbeat who had abandoned them, as her mother had claimed in her more lucid moments. He was a Romano. And Alistair had paid to make them disappear. She clutched the ledger to her chest, the cold of the freezer seeping into her bones. He hadn't just insulted a waitress. He had tried to erase his own blood. The annual Romano family legacy gala was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. It was a grotesque display of power, where politicians and judges rubbed shoulders with killers and extortionists, all pretending to be civilized philanthropists. This year, Alistair was to be honored with a Man of the Year award from a charity he controlled. It was his coronation, the moment he would cement his place, not just as a feared man, but as a respected one. It was the perfect stage for a public execution. Anya arrived, not as a waitress or a shadowy gambler, but as a spectre of his own creation. She wore a stunning, floor-length dress of blood-red silk that seemed to drink the light of the crystal chandeliers. Her hair was styled in an elegant cascade, and the only jewelry she wore was a simple silver locket tucked just out of sight. The faint, silvery scars on the back of her hand were the only hint of the woman from the diner. She didn't sneak in. She walked through the grand front doors, an engraved invitation in her hand. An invitation she had created, printed on the same stock as the others, and mailed to herself. She was a ghost on the guest list. She moved through the crowd with an ethereal grace, a phantom gliding through a masquerade of the corrupt. Men who would normally dismiss a waitress now stared, their eyes filled with avarice and curiosity. She was a beautiful mystery, and in this world, mystery was a form of power. Across the ballroom, she saw Sal, the diner owner, dressed in the crisp white uniform of the catering staff, a tray of champagne flutes in his hand. He met her gaze and gave a barely perceptible nod. He was her hidden ally, her anchor to the world Alistair had tried to crush. She found Alistair holding court by the champagne fountain, a circle of sycophants laughing too loudly at his jokes. He was radiant with arrogance, a king in his castle. He saw her, and his practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He saw the waitress, the gambler, but he saw something else too, a confidence that unnerved him. Excusing himself from his fawning circle, he intercepted her near the grand marble staircase, his bulk blocking her path. He kept his voice low, a menacing growl beneath the string quartet's melody. "I should have known a rat would find its way into the palace," he hissed, his lips barely moving. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here. Did you think your little poker stunt earned you a seat at my table? You should have taken the money and kept running." "You invited me," Anya said, her voice a calm, cool counterpoint to his barely contained rage. She held up the flawless invitation. "Or did you forget?" He snatched it, glanced at the forgery, and let out a short, contemptuous laugh. Cute. Very cute. But clever rats get stepped on. I should have had Lorenzo bury you after you walked out of my game. A mistake I intend to correct. Tonight. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. Smile for the cameras, little girl. It's the last party you'll ever attend. Is that what you told Lorenzo to do? Anya asked, her expression one of mild curiosity. Where is he, by the way? I thought he never left your side. Alistair's smirk tightened. He's attending to another matter. Don't worry. You'll see him soon enough. I doubt it, she said, her voice still quiet, but now carrying a sharp, metallic edge. I gave him enough untraceable currency to start a new life on a continent without an extradition treaty. He's probably choosing a new name right now. He always hated Lorenzo. The first genuine crack appeared in Alistair's composure. His eyes narrowed. You're lying. Am I? Anya's gaze drifted over his shoulder, across the opulent ballroom. You build your empire on fear, Alistair. But fear is a brittle foundation. You didn't think I just played a recording for him, did you? That's amateur hour. I also sent him a doctored audio file of you ordering a hit on him. He wasn't just afraid of you. He was terrified you'd already decided to kill him. It makes a man very cooperative. His face went rigid. The lie was so plausible, so perfectly in character for him, that it might as well have been the truth. He looked around the room, a flicker of real paranoia in his eyes. Who else had she reached? You see that man over there? Anya continued, her voice a devastating whisper. The old one with the catering uniform? His name is Sal. You wouldn't remember him. You step on so many people, their faces must blur together. He's the one who slipped me the staff rosters, the security patrols, the audio-visual schematics for tonight. He was very helpful. Alistair's head swiveled. He saw Sal, who met his furious gaze with a look of quiet, profound defiance. The king was in his castle, but the servants were opening the gates to the enemy. He turned back to Anya, his face a thundercloud. What is this? What have you done? You made a mistake in the diner, Alistair, she said, holding up her right hand, turning it slightly, so the light caught the web of silvery scars. Not because you hurt me, but because you reminded me of who I am. And when you sent your thugs to my home, you thought you were sending a message to a broken little bird. You were. You were telling me that there were no more rules. You were giving me permission to burn your world to the ground. So thank you for that. He laughed, a guttural, dismissive sound that didn't quite mask the tremor of unease in his voice. Burn my world? You're a nobody, a ghost. You're about to disappear for good. You're right, I am a ghost. Echo, they used to call me. She watched the name land, saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes. He wouldn't know it, but some of the federal agents he had on his payroll would. And you're right, you do leave ghosts behind. Like Marcus, over there at the soundboard. His father owned the finest recording studio in the city, until you decided you wanted the property for a parking garage and bankrupted him. Marcus was very happy to help me make sure the audio tonight is crystal clear. Alistair froze. He looked from Anya to the stage, to the bland-faced audio engineer, who gave him a small, cold smile. He was trapped. He was standing on a stage of his own making, and the floor was about to give way. The Master of Ceremonies was approaching the podium. And that it's being streamed live, Anya added, her voice a final, fatal blow. To every major news outlet in the state, and to a secure server at the FBI. The one Lorenzo's testimony unlocked for them this morning. Smile, Alistair. You're the man of the year. panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He looked around wildly, at the exits, at his men. But they were too far away, schmoozing with the city's elite. He was alone with her, isolated in a crowd of hundreds. The string quartet finished its piece to polite applause. The MC tapped the microphone. A soft chime echoed through the room. It was live. "What do you want?" he finally choked out, his voice a strangled rasp. His arrogant swagger had evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered animal. "I want you to tell them a story," she said, her eyes boring into his. From the neckline of her dress, she pulled out the silver locket. She didn't open it. She just let it swing from its chain, a pendulum marking the final seconds of his life as he knew it. Recognition flickered in Alistair's eyes, a deep, primal memory stirring. It was followed by a wave of confusion and dread. Where did you get that?" "It was my mother's," Anya said, her voice now carrying a sudden, profound sadness. She had subtly activated a tiny microphone clipped to her dress. Their intimate conversation was now being broadcast throughout the ballroom. The low murmur of the crowd began to die down as people turned towards the strange dialogue amplified by the speakers. "She told me it belonged to my grandmother. She said my father gave it to her before he left." Alistair stared at the locket, mesmerized, the chaos of the gala fading into a dull roar. He saw his father's study, smelled the cigar smoke and old leather. He heard his father's dying wish, a command whispered with a weak, rattling breath. Erase the mistake. Protect the family name. He had seen it not as a burden, but as his final test of loyalty. He was so lost in the memory that he didn't realize the entire ballroom was now silent, listening. "My father was a weak fool," Alistair whispered, the words raw with a lifetime of resentment, forgetting completely where they were. His voice, amplified, boomed through the grand hall like the judgment of a wrathful god. Anya pressed her advantage, her voice a gentle, probing question that was also a public accusation. "A weak fool. Tell them why, Alistair. Tell them about the peasant girl, about Anna Petrova." "He fell for some nobody, a waitress," Alistair continued, his eyes locked on the locket, his voice a venomous confession. "Had a bastard son with her, a stain on our name. But the boy died, thank God. When the old man was on his deathbed, he made me promise to look after them, the woman and her other child, to give them a piece of the inheritance." He laughed, a harsh, ugly crack of sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "Me, Alistair Romano, share my birthright with a waitress and her whelp. This family, this name, this legacy. It was mine. I earned it. I protected it." The ballroom was now utterly, deathly silent. The only sound was Alistair's own voice, damning him. The politicians, the judges, the socialites, they all stared, their phones held up, recording. The red lights of news cameras blinked from the balconies. "So I buried them," Alistair snarled, his voice rising to a roar of triumphant cruelty, his chest puffed out with pride. "I found the doctor who signed the boy's death certificate, a man named Abramov. I paid him to lose the records, to erase the boy's existence from the city registry. I gave the woman a pittance and sent her away, told her to disappear and never come back. I erased my father's mistake. I am the only legacy of the Romano family. I am the Romano family." He lunged for the locket, his face a mask of fury, needing to crush this last remnant of his father's weakness. But Anya was faster. She stepped back, her face a portrait of cold, heart-breaking sorrow. "You didn't just erase a mistake, Alistair," she said, her voice now amplified, ringing with a terrible, resonant clarity. "The boy died, yes. My brother. But my mother was pregnant again when you sent her away. With a daughter. She snapped the locket open and held it up, turning it so he could see the faded photograph inside. The picture of his mother, a woman he revered like a saint, holding him, Alistair, as a baby. My name is not Anya Petrova, she declared, her voice breaking with the weight of a lifetime of lies and a pain so deep it was part of her soul. It's Anastasia Romano, and you are my brother. The word hung in the air, a death sentence. Brother. Alistair froze, his body rigid, his face a canvas of utter, abject horror. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly grey. He looked from the locket in her hand to her face, and for the first time, he saw it. Not the waitress, not the gambler, but the faint echo of his own father's eyes, the sharp, proud line of his mother's jaw. He saw family. He saw the blood he had disowned, the legacy he had tried to murder. At that precise moment, as if summoned by the confession itself, the grand ballroom doors burst open. FBI agents in tactical gear swarmed in, weapons raised, their movements sharp and efficient, shattering the tableau of horrified silence. "Alistair Romano!" a lead agent yelled, his voice cutting through the stunned atmosphere. "You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, and the murder of Dr. Mikhail Abramov." Alistair didn't seem to hear them. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Anastasia, the sister he had slapped, burned, broken, and tried to crush. The sister whose very existence undid his entire world, his entire identity. They grabbed him, pulling his arms behind his back with brutal force. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, the sound echoing the final closing of a vault. The click pulled him from his daze. As they led him through the stunned crowd of his former sycophants, who now shrank away from him as if he were diseased, he was a hollowed-out man. His wealth was gone. Anastasia had already funneled the ledger, his entire legacy of crime, to the feds, who had frozen every asset. His power was gone. His freedom was gone. His name was a curse. As he passed the catering station, Sal stepped forward, holding a single empty champagne flute on a silver tray. He looked Alistair directly in the eye, his own gaze clear and steady. "Your check, Mr. Romano," he said, his voice quiet but firm. It was the deepest cut of all. They pushed him out of the warmth of the ballroom and into the cold, chaotic night air, into a maelstrom of flashing lights and shouting reporters. And he saw them, a silent jury standing on the sidewalk, their faces illuminated by the strobing red and blue lights. There was the old baker whose shop his thugs had terrorized for years, the tailor he'd shaken down for protection money, the dozens of invisible people he had stepped on, extorted, and ruined his entire life. They were all there, a silent chorus bearing witness to his fall. The last person he saw was Anastasia. She stood apart from the others, the silver locket now clutched tightly in her fist. There was no triumph in her eyes, no gloating smile. There was only a profound, aching sadness for the family that could have been, for the brother she never knew, and for the terrible, brutal justice that had finally been served. He stumbled, his legs weak. He opened his mouth to say something, her name a curse, a plea for a forgiveness he knew he could never receive. But all that came out was a dry, pathetic croak. No words. His voice, the tool of his power and his terror, was gone. The door of the federal vehicle slammed shut, sealing him in darkness. Anastasia watched it pull away, the sirens wailing into the distance. She felt the weight of the last 25 years, the weight of her mother's secrets and her own rage, begin to lift. She looked down at the locket in her hand, then at the faint scars on her other. She had taken his cruelty and forged it into a key that unlocked her past and his prison. She was no longer a ghost, no longer an echo. She was Anastasia. And for the first time in her life, she was free. She turned away from the flashing lights and walked into the quiet darkness of the city, towards a future she would write herself.